Hey, welcome back. The moon is still in Pisces, isn't it? There must be an excuse for this. You know, when it goes into Aries, everything will be just fine. Where's the South Node now? Oh, where are we going next? Well, we'll certainly jump, you know that. I have to ask you, however, now you have been reading, we've been reading together about motion in the causal body. Is there anything that we discussed this morning which stood out to you as possibly significant? Or is it just way up there and impossible to relate to? I was wondering about the temple. Does that apply to all levels? Well, does the temple apply to all levels? I think there are temples. There are some interesting other temples that are not part of the periodical vehicles of man. There are three temples which are periodical vehicles, and they are particular, they are constructs which last a long time and which give evidence to our evolution. However, if we want to talk about temples, I wonder, temple justice. Let's see what this is. Okay, there are a few other temples. There's a temple presided over by the Buddha and maybe one by the Christ, and there is a special karmic temple. This is talking about karmic streams entering our solar system. It's in under the law of attraction, which is more or less the section we're in. Page 1183. The main streams of energy enter at the top depression in the solar sphere and passes through the entire ring pass knot, bisecting it into two halves. With this stream enters that group of lives we call the Lords of Karma. They preside over the attractive forces and distribute them justly. Very Libran, very Saturn. They pass to the center of the sphere, and there, if I may so express it, locate and set up the holy temple of divine justice. This is what the Lords of Karma do. This is not, of course, related to man per se. Sending out to the four quarters of the circle the four Maharajas, their representatives. So the karmic lords or Lipika lords are even greater beings than these mighty four great kings or Maharajas sent out to the periphery of the cross within the circle. So is the equal armed cross formed, which is also the symbol of Aquarius, and all the wheels of energy set in motion. This is conditioned by the karmic seeds of an earlier system, and only that substance is utilized by the Logos, and only those lives come into manifestation who have set up a mutual attraction. So this is a whole section on how the Lords of Karma came into our system. Now, speaking of temples, I believe it's in esoteric psychology. I'm not sure, but let's see. Buddha temple. Let's see. Well, there's something, a temple connected with the Buddha. It's a temple on the mental plane. Let's take a look at this. Again, these three temples of the mysteries. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. Earlier. Well, maybe we can begin simply reading here about three temples of the mysteries. These three temples of the mysteries, of which two are already existing and the third will later appear, are each of them related to one of the three divine aspects, and the energy of the three major rays pours through them. These are in the three worlds, I believe, because the temple of Solomon is above the three worlds, and so is the temple of Ezekiel. In the corresponding approaches upon the path of ascent by humanity, it is the energy of the four minor rays of attribute which produce the power to make the needed approach. Through the active work and the guidance of the presiding guardians of these temples, the fifth kingdom in nature will be brought into manifested being. Over the temple upon the mental plane, the Buddha presides, and there will consummate his unfinished work. Over the temple on the plane of sentient feeling and of loving aspiration, the Christ presides, and this is the temple of the most difficult initiatory processes. The reason for this difficulty and for the importance of this temple is due to the fact that our solar system is a system of love, of sentient response to the love of God, and the development of that response through the innate faculty of feeling. This calls for the cooperation, or sentiency. This calls for the cooperation of a son of God who will embody two divine principles. Later will come an avatar. It may be Master R, in my opinion, who will achieve neither the full enlightenment of the Buddha nor the full expression of the divine love of the Christ, but who will have a large measure of wisdom and of love, plus that materializing power which will enable him to found a divine powerhouse upon the physical plane. This will be the third temple. His task, in many ways, is far more difficult than that of the two preceding avatars, for he carries in himself not only the energies of the two divine principles already duly anchored upon the planet by his two great brothers, but he has also within himself much of a third divine principle hitherto not used upon our planet. He carries the will of God into manifestation, and of that will we as yet know nothing, really nothing. So difficult is his task that the new group of world servers is being trained to assist him. Thus, an aspect of the first ray principle will be anchored by him upon earth. And we do know that the seventh ray is particularly the concretization of the first ray of will and power. The two are intimately related. Let's just see. So it doesn't say who that is. Okay, but it continues in the discussion of the temples. Very interesting. Let me just check the word temple in this book. Temple, there are 9 temples. I believe. Well, because it's too much of the manifesting power, and it's, and it's related specifically to the temple work, And later, he does also talk about a 7th ray avatar coming. That's right. And after all, if the Buddha and the Christ are considered avatars, then the Mahachohan would also be considered an avatar in the same sense. Let the builders from deep within the temple of his heart, subjective temple of the Lord, members of this group. No, this is the first place where the 3 temples of the mysteries are discussed. So, a temple is a consecrated dimension or space where a particular type of energy is invoked, utilized and distributed. So, in other words, a temple makes it easier to concentrate energy which must be accessed and to work with that energy, because in a way it protects against intrusion against that type of energy. That's why all temples have to be guarded. One of the very first cares in Masonry is to guard the temple, make sure the inner spiritual work is not interrupted. And this is given to one who holds symbolically the flaming sword. You know, the angel at the gate of paradise holds the flaming sword, making sure that protecting the intruder from what might be found inside and protecting what is inside from the intruder. So it is a certain type of energy which, unless your energy measures up to it, you cannot pass. Well, you know, when we start getting into what is Saint Michael and what are some of these archangels, they represent all the way from planetary logoi themselves down to more modest representations. They simply call it the angel with the flaming sword. And some perhaps, it's actually one of the names of the fifth ray Lord. You know, that's rather interesting, isn't it? The angel with the flaming sword. Let's see if that's angel flaming, that ought to do it. The angel with the flaming sword. This is the name of the fifth ray Lord, and it's because, in a way, it discriminates what is without from what is within, and tests according to frequency. That's what fifth ray is involved with: number, frequency, quantity. And if your number is not sufficient to the number inside, you don't pass. If your frequency is high enough, then you pass. Yes, Saint Peter seems to guard the gate. And also Sagittarius is sometimes called the guardian of the gate. There are always gates, and they seem to need guardians against party crashers, you know. You know, if you crashed a party, then it would be applied to you the old statement that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. It's so very true in occultism, because the one thing you cannot do is rush into the temple. There are even some rituals which assure your death if you rush into the temple. So, you know, which is symbolic, of course, but probably it is less symbolic and truly actual with respect to inner sacred places. So in the Hermetic system, you really have to know where you belong and where you don't belong, and where it's safe to be and where you're qualified to be, and where your frequency attunes you to the dimension and where it doesn't. So that's where extreme patience is required, isn't it? And that means patience, perspicacity, a knowledge of the system in which you're involved, and a lack of ego. Because the lower ego is usually what it is that wants us to rush forward because we want to be there. You know, the illusory we wants to be illusory there. So patience is one of the last qualities that is truly developed by the initiate. And actually what the masters say, irritation is one of the last things to be overcome. Basically they're saying, you see our students, therefore you see why irritation is one of the last things we overcome. I think it's pretty funny. Because we are those students. One of the last fetters. Okay, so these temples are of all kinds, and what we're trying to do right now is live within the Temple of Solomon, which is our causal body. And sometimes I've said the best way to do that is forget what you are now and think of the best you've accumulated over millennia of years, and be in the presence of that best. Be in the presence of your best colors, your best sounds, your best qualities, your best motives, and before you know it, you may find yourself within the causal body, your consciousness within your best. Because that's what the Temple of Solomon does, doesn't it? It stores your best for a future festival of fire. Meanwhile, out of that causal body, all of that best works in service. Until we discover that our best is not enough and that we have to sacrifice our best to some still higher impulse or motive, which is still less personal. Because in a way, the causal body is still very individual, is still very personal. Transpersonal, but still personal is there. Okay, so that much on temples. Anything else that we want to talk about here that we have discussed? We certainly did discuss a bit of the Black Lodge, Mahat, materialism, the development of the sixth sense to an extent unconceivable by present-day humanity. Basically, whenever people try to protect their prerogatives because they don't trust what's coming, even though it's part of a greater plan, they put themselves first, you have the evil situation. It's based on great ignorance, supreme ignorance. It's like saying, I'm happy here in the third aspect. I don't think you, God, or whatever you are, can do any better than what I've already got. I'll stay here and make you stay here as well. So we're fighting that at the moment, this lack of trust in a new world in which the principle of love could and will express under the Christ. And he says that the last-ditch fight of materialism, they will fight to the last ditch, will be extreme. And we're in it right now. Next 14 years before 2025, the last-ditch fight of materialism. Meaning, hanging on to the old perceptions which were cultivated in the previous solar system, when they, these lords of form, were the rulers. They rebelled against opportunity. So let us make sure that even though it's pretty risky, we do not rebel against opportunity just because we don't know the outcome ahead of time. Yeah, Gisle. Well, I maybe can't follow the finances too much, but there is the sense that freedom is calling to many human beings who are waking up to the will aspect and are demonstrating it through revolution, and they are tired as well of the reassertion of the old theocratic forms. They're being touched by the Aquarian energy, but they're not too well organized. Still, they are being touched by new possibilities. The powers that be are very strong. They want to preserve the financial control, and preservation of that kind of financial control is also equivalent to promoting ignorance because it prevents education. The money is spent on armaments, and DK did comment on that. He said the billions spent on armaments have to be spent on education, otherwise watch out for the coming war. So the Vatican has been involved in that, and many of the dictatorships have been involved in that, and the oligarchy has been involved in that. The ruling financial classes who are just quite happy with how things are, mainly cornering the market, amassing what we call wealth, and keeping opportunity out of the hands of the many who would try to advance their lives but don't have enough substance to do it. So the battle will be between the unrightfully rich, who don't think that planetary resources are for everybody, and the poor, so to speak, who have this feeling that the world wealth in terms of energy really should be better distributed. And that doesn't mean that there's going to be a perfect form of distribution arising. What I think will happen, we have a tendency now for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer, and I think the Great Divide will cause big revolutions in many places, places where there haven't been revolutions, maybe even Europe, maybe the United States, and so forth. We're already, and it'll probably have some kind of financial basis. Now, DK did say this. It's a Vulcanian statement. He says, when the day comes when people can stand together with massed intent. This is like So Taurus, Vulcan, New Group of World Service. You stand with massed intent, and you insist together upon the right. This is the nonviolent rising of sufficient numbers of people who can stand in that kind of will that there will be a change. Then the attempt to assassinate, snipe, kill these uprisings will fall away before that massed intent. Of course, the present danger is that the well-organized reactionary theocratic forces will attempt to seize the destabilization of the revolutions. So you're in the road ahead is precarious, and to go back is impossible. So we are caught in the crisis times that precede the coming of the hierarchy. And the old saying is, they will say peace, 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 but there will be no peace. And there will be no peace until there is the cultivation of the second aspect, which honors in every human being the will to a better life. Because there are a lot of people who control things, and they don't care whether you have a better life or not. They just don't care. It's survival of the fittest, and they are the fit. The term predator elite has been used. I think it's an amazing term. It's true. It's like people sort of like around the second initiation or more who just believe in themselves, and it's the whole Ayn Rand philosophy that you, the individual, are more important than anything you might do for the collective. So in a way, an Aquarianization or a collectivization of consciousness without falling into the trap of communism and pure mediocre socialism has to come into existence. And I think people have to suffer enough to have it come into existence. So I don't think it's going to be easy at all. I think that we are living in countries like this in a very privileged condition, but already you see your freedom of speech is threatened, in this country and in other places, where people who are part of a tribal consciousness and religion want to force that upon the liberated thought of the West. So now the degenerating West has to shore up its values and fight for what was gained during the past 500 years. I think it will be the most tumultuous time humanity has seen since Atlantis. Does that cover it? Because, look, I can't speak to the specifics of what country is in what kind of financial condition or whatever. I just know there's going to be a movement towards fragmentation because we don't want to share. If you're having a tough time, buddy, it's too bad for you. I'm having a better time, so I distance myself from you. That could threaten the European Union, could threaten the euro. In the United States, some Russian economist has said, well, it will divide into 6 autonomous economic zones, and the whole union will be fragmented. Of course, this is what the forces of darkness would like. And Master R, behind the European Union and all that, and behind the Federation of States that we call the United States, those second-ray unitive movements are supported by the hierarchy, and the Black Lodge wants individualism, fragmentation, the dominance of the few, the enslavement of the many, and it's all going to be fought out in the next 14 years. That's my anticipation. I could say I hope I'm wrong, but on the other hand, how in the world will humanity ever recognize hierarchy? Usually, in other words, what DK said is a little cryptic. He said, humanity will realize that his problems are of such a nature that it by itself cannot solve them, and then will invoke hierarchy. So what will have to happen for us to realize as a human race that we by ourselves cannot solve all problems unassisted? A few more Japans, a few more nuclear holocausts which will poison the place where we live, the poisoning of the food supply. It's already happening. Get ready for these next 14 years because they will be the truly testing time. On the other hand, the old saying that in Atlantis people began to tread the path of initiation who wouldn't be treading it now even now. Because things were so intense in those days that they were forced onto path of initiation because, in Master Moria's words, the worse the better. So we will have plenty of the worse the better coming up, and people will have to fight for their gains. Or we will subside into the reinitiation into the earth, which he talked about in the Taurus chapter, and which could give us millennia of darkness where the reassertion of materialism occurs. So everyone is responsible now, and in little ways and big, we will find ourselves having to sacrifice in order to preserve the values, spiritual values, by which humanity can and must live. And, you know, we'd like to say, well, okay, everything's going to be beautiful for the rest of my life and onward and ever upward. This is not taking into consideration the last-ditch fight of materialism, who really doesn't care whether you live or die or have any quality of life at all, as long as the few are enriched to an obscene extent, accumulating around themselves things that are not needed at all, but which are purely the result of rampant desire, just like in Atlantean days. So, I gave a talk like this at the conference, a real upper at the end of the conference. Fortunately, Tuya's service followed it. I wouldn't have wanted to leave the conference on the particular note I was sounding. And then I started to organize, and I'm a little bit appalled by what I started to do, but we'll do it. A number of people signed up for what I called the EDL, or Esoteric Defense League, which would be a inner group of meditators who would take the dire first-ray, sixth-ray situations into account and who would really counterattack using the methods that we have been given, especially in Rule 10, and other methods about the sevenfold wheel of living fire, living love. We need a counterattack. And most esotericists are a little bit passive, a little bit innocuous, a little bit ineffectual, kind of going along without realizing the will is necessary. So if you'd like to be a member of the EDL, which also is like the English Defense League, of which I'm a member. Anyway, this EDL is something that I'm cooking on now, and I'll be sending out the meditations which will be involved in that, because I do think a esoteric counterattack is needed. And he wouldn't have given us that incredible meditation in Rule 10 about focus the force at the jewel's point and find the veil that it can touch, and, walk through the veils, wielding destruction, clearing out the refuse. Totally first-rate meditation in Rule 10 in Rays and Initiations. And it's needed. It's really needed. But, of course, it's a risk to do it on any regular basis, because you'll attract the attention of the bad guys, and, there will be a counterattack. So this is war. That's what I'm really trying to say. We're in a war. We're in a war. It's on the mental plane. It's on the emotional plane. And it's not yet fully, and may it not come, upon the physical plane. DK says it better not precipitate, because it'll be the war to end all wars, and it will make the last war look like child's play. Does that cover it? I know I didn't answer anything about Greece or Portugal, but I'll leave that to better financial heads than I am. I just know that people are going to have to, under Saturn and Aquarius, do with less at first, meaning that if we're going to share resources, this horrible word rationing might come in. Now, rationing took place during the war, making sure that everybody had at least the necessities and nobody was hoarding everything, right? So I believe we're entering a period of rationing on a global basis in order to sustain our planet. We consume far too much. Yes, our overconsumption is not exactly contributing to our health, is it? And DK said, you know how he is rather specific about numbers. He says, well, your adrenal center is 15% open, and your heart is 60%, and your solar plexus is 75%. He says, we all eat 4 times too much. He didn't say 3, he didn't say 2, he said 4. 4 times too much. Of course, I can see the utility of a sign hanging above the table in the dining room. You are about to eat 4 times too much. But maybe that would, be a little bit of a downer. So rationing, Saturn and Aquarius, for the sake of sharing. In other words, what is the appropriate amount of any of the necessities of life which anybody really needs, not just what they want. So this is Saturn over Mars. Or Vulcan Saturn over Mars. The subduing of selfishness. Hard-pressed. Being hard-pressed. Hard-pressed. Yes, yes. Yes, it is. It's Vulcan and Saturn to me together. Yes, the pressure of Vulcan, according to the spiritual will, economizing. See, we have to reorient our whole energy structure, and temporarily that will mean that some who are used to enjoying a glut of energy cannot do so, and countries will be involved here, maybe the entire Western world. So we're really fighting for humanity's life at this point. The lower centers want to overcome the higher centers, and the higher centers are in danger. They really are. Of course, they're very well armed, but if they use their arms, it's a defeating purpose. It would be a Pyrrhic victory. It would destroy the opposition, but it would destroy the destroyers as well. So, say it again, please. Oh, there's no chart. It's just the idea. No chart. Vulcan is spiritual will, and Saturn is the divine plan. Spiritual will applied to the divine plan, and Saturn is the law of economy. And Mars is desire as you want it. Let desire and form be ruler. So, cornering the market, Scorpio, Mars ruling Scorpio. I will get all I can. I. So it's the defeat of ego. Ego and the last-ditch fight of materialism go together. So I guess what we have to do within ourselves is defeat our own lower ego. Because we can't run around preaching it unless we do it. And that's the hard part. As the Buddha said, if you overcome yourself, conquer yourself, it's like one who has conquered 1,000 armies. And so it's the biggest battle. So any of us in this particular field have to overcome those tendencies in our own nature. Then we can serve as an example to others who say, well, something can be done. So I think we're in the most revolutionary of times since I don't know when. And I think a vision of these times was shown to the Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane that he saw 2,000 years ahead. And basically, he saw the perspective of the planetary logos and said, yes, I will do this. Not only will I serve for 2,500 years in the age of Pisces, but I will serve in the age of Aquarius according to thy will, because otherwise humanity won't make it. See, what I did talk about in the conference, the title of my last talk was The Prince of Peace and the Final War. So this is, quite a dramatic title. The whole idea was that I just read it in one place, that Christ is doing all he can to prevent a final war. And those particular words seem full of portent, if you will. And we can say, okay, well, that happened a long time ago, and things have changed and all the rest of it. But I think you can see the final war shaping up, but it has to be fought on the mental and emotional plane. There are instances of precipitation, but I think the hierarchy is doing all it can to balance the situation. I say the first ray, third ray, and sixth ray are out of control. We have a dictatorship and reinforced power structures of strongmen. We have financial manipulation, which robs many of what they need to live, and we have fanatical, blind religious adherence. 1, 3, and 6. What's needed is ray 2, ray 7, ray 4, and of course, you see, ray 5 could go either way. Ray 5 tends to serve the power structure and provide the technology needed for whatever the motive may be. It's interested in pure research. So, who's it going to serve? The 136 or the 247? Fortunately, Libra and the second ray are growing in the planetary horoscope, and the sixth ray is on its way out, and the seventh ray is getting stronger. So we just require great patience at this time, and fortitude, and the ability to stand with massed intent, which is that Vulcanian stance, and say, no, we will not, This will be done this way and not your way. Now, right now, these are just words, but you just watch in a couple of years whether they don't become actions, whether they don't describe the situations in which we find ourselves. Because I believe that there is a big push now of the Black Lodge. And DK promised it. He said, look, Christ said, the man swept his house clean of 40 devils and found himself in worse condition than he was later because he didn't take the opportunity that the clean house gave him. So, and he wrote about that in the context of war. So, if we did not take the opportunity, The billions that went into armaments did not go into education. They did not counter the dark, theocratic, selfish thought forms. They did not. So we're in that balancing point right now where we have to see where it will go. And anything right now is just the attempt to somehow preserve the balance and get through this period. And of course, the financial crisis in many places brings up the whole issue of sharing and of responsibility. The egoistic gamblers wanted to get a hold of the banking money so they could do what they wanted with it and make more, as it were, which is, basically spending your money and mine in order to enhance their own possible gain. So there's a rather disgusting payoff of their misdeeds had to be paid off because they're quote-unquote too big to fail, except maybe in Iceland. We'll see. Maybe the volcanoes are some example of the tension there that between the refusing public and the bankers that went the way of all other Western countries, basically playing with your resources for their own egoistic greed. And basically, the ageless wisdom comes into this because it stabilizes the mind through the presentation of the plan. See, right now we've got all kinds of crazy ideas about what reality is. If there's no God, there's only heaven, you got to believe, all these things about what reality is. And we have a very logical, sane, and time-tested and hierarchically approved system of thought, which if it can get into the public, and it already is to a degree, it can change the way people think about their values and their desires. That's why we have a very responsible role at this time. To somehow get the word out there so that people can understand there are alternatives to their childish views of the world, which and both atheism and theism in the militant sense are both childish. We have a mature view of the world here, and we have to represent it. And of course, probably we will represent it at some degree of sacrifice to our not-selves, I believe. Because people won't want to hear it, certain people will not want to hear it. Okay, well, those are some pleasant thoughts about the coming tests. And who knows what hierarchy has up its sleeve, It certainly is trying to make things as tolerable as possible. But how DK said, if there had been just a few more men and women of goodwill and they had been a bit more powerful, the whole thing called the Second War would not have precipitated on the physical plane. It was a failure of the men and women of goodwill, a failure of the disciples in the world. So I wonder if we do realize how responsible a position we actually have. It's nice not to have to think about that, because you just want to get on with your life and do your work and all the rest of it. But if you think about the implications, the hierarchy is trying to work through some people. We should try to be those people, and if we are those people, we have very heavy responsibility. Any thoughts? Yes. People have been hiding their misdeeds. What's it called? Super injunction. Okay. So, counteracting super injunctions by revealing names in England, and the ability to hide has collapsed. Thousands of people have risked, and these people in England revealed names. They try to hide with their private lives and other things they've done wrong. But people have revealed them in their thousands, and they cannot be sued because there are too many. A super injunction is technically what? If you mention it at all, you can be taken in front of court. So it's a gag order. A super injunction is a gag order. And the people have overcome the gag order. In a nonviolent way, by writing the names on the internet. The value of internet is the public opinion can emerge. But there was no way to connect with people. Now there is, and all is revealed. Yeah, and that's why so many dictatorships want to silence the internet, tax the internet, control the internet. It's a big free speech issue at this moment. Yeah, and the four freedoms. Maybe we remember what they are, but freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. So he said that was as much given by the great disciple FDR as humanity could absorb at the time, and these freedoms are under attack now. And when they're under attack, we know it's because the Black Lodge is on the move again, and the house was swept clean, but no advantage was taken of it, and now it's filled with devils again, as it were. So this is a time comparable to the Atlantean War, when people of our type who know something of this nature will all find ourselves very tested. When we think about what DK says, how we are living in the time of the Forerunner, how like the time of John the Baptist, when he finished his career, and Jesus was walking for Christ. It ended the collision of two forces. It will end in 2025. We are coming for more and more intense time. How is it in England, Denmark, Norway, England? What I heard is that they try to proceed in law protecting so the companies do not have to show the profits. So how is it here? Here in Denmark, all company accounts are public. What is the development? I heard when I left from Finland. It's related to the European Union. It's about revealing what your company makes. Luckily, there are so many people aware who take notice of this. It has been a common normality that everything has to be transparent, but not now. That some try to conceal everything. A lot of companies here in Denmark don't pay tax because they're registered somewhere else. And they don't pay tax for years and years. They're registered somewhere else. They make a lot of money and don't pay any taxes simply because of where they're registered. This is done between different countries. Even though you should be able to see everything, it's never been that way. It's never been transparent. They've always been able to hide things. If you are be in cooperation with a company, you can ask about the company's tax situation. The problem is most of the taxes are sent out of the country. Yeah, but the principle is non-sharing. In other words, the people who are making a great deal do not want to share with the rest of society. They want it for their illusory selves. That's the politics of the country. Sure, but it reflects the people's will. And the people's will is based on ignorance. And the ignorance is there because they don't know things like this. Or believe it. Even if you said to the public, Bill Gates has so much money. He can buy Austria. He can buy Austria. Bill Gates can buy Austria. That's wrong. Just a few are deciding what to do with this incredible wealth. He can buy Austria. But can he buy Denmark? That's the question. He can't buy England yet. We know something about Bill Gates, but we know nothing about the oil sheikhs, and they have huge resources. These are the levels which are so beyond the government. Well, it's not the Aquarian way, is it? But in order to get there, we still have to live through the last decades of Pisces, don't we? And we have to live through all that glamour and illusion and clarify it, don't we? There are enough people who could stand with masked intent if they had the courage. It will require a lot of courage of little people. Even in some of these countries, Syria, Egypt, Bahrain, there were a lot of courageous people that took to the streets. The ones that are rightly motivated, and many of them died. I mean, you're out on the street, a sniper could be aiming at you at any time. And you think, by what right is he the king of Syria? I don't know what he is. Is he president? Yes. So why does he have a right to kill his people who assemble? I guess Egypt was a little more, but there were many killed, but when you keep people without knowledge, they cannot read. How do they communicate? That's why this old traditional superstitious and tribal beliefs in lower society. And then there's the upper society. They're living their own life, and there's no communication between the two. An English reporter was a young man to check that out, check how the societies were functioning. In 3 months he was killed. He didn't believe how bad it was. He was killed in 3 months. How dark something can be. In the Western world, we think there's someone here to protect us, but not in those countries. That is the dark side. Another says, most of the information that we got from Northern Africa has come from young people via mobile phones, not from the standard news. Another technology is involved, giving us the truth. This is all about knowledge, the communication of knowledge, a new level of another says, we have a good example in Denmark. A newspaper called So what is the newspaper called? Politiken. And it supports a girl in Jordan who is trying to keep an independent newspaper in spite of all that is going on. So Denmark is supporting that. She has a small staff. Started with a few men. And now most are female journalists in Jordan. It's being supported here, yes. The country does not dare to touch her because of the other country's interest. She's too high profile to be touched. All right. Even Denmark sends a lot of money to help keep the world safe in the oil countries. Okay. All right. Well, that was a good discussion prompted by Gisela's question. It was, I think the group needed it, actually, you know. There's only so much cosmic fire you can take before the mind collapses under the weight of it. We have to be able to speak about what we know. What? Oh, okay. Well, I have it there. I can give it to you. Yeah, I can give it to you, or it's over here too. But of course, living it is another matter. Okay, well, perhaps we then have discussed what we can from this section on motion in the causal body. It went from motion in the causal body to politics pretty quickly. Absolutely. The monad has to live on real life experience too, doesn't it? Well, you know, the question of evil, relative evil anyway, is with us very much in today's world. And if the Black Lodge is really making a last-ditch stand for this cycle, even though they won't be defeated until the Judgment Day, which is millions of years ahead, but if they're making a last-ditch stand in this cycle, we are all necessarily involved, and probably in some pretty subtle ways. Probably a lot of choices that we are going to be confronted with will be of a very momentous type, not only in terms of our individual lives, but how we impact our environment. So I think, you know, it's the last little bit of the peaceful time. When I look at my country and I see the number of tornadoes that have hit, you know, it's almost like preternatural. It's like, what's going on? Is this God talking or what? You know, it says you will reap the whirlwind. This is in the Bible, you know. So a lot of people are reaping the whirlwind. The whole nation is. We've had, you know, you don't hear much anymore from Japan, but I think that's because it's just so bad that they've just stopped talking about it, you know. And I think there'll be many of those kinds of events that touch everybody. What DK called it a community of suffering. He says it was produced by World War II, and because humanity had been through a community of suffering, they were more ready to take constructive action. Well, we've had 60-something years since that time, and it may mean that we have to be introduced again to a community of suffering, so we are willing to say never again to these kinds of things. I'm sure when we all have passed through it and look back, we will look at it as decisive for the planet and decisive in our own spiritual life. Right now you can look a little bit with you know, fear and trembling and foreboding and say, oh boy, that looks pretty bad. But later it will look as if it had been the right thing, and we will have been privileged to be able to pass through it and to participate in it. But I think everybody should be somehow very sober in their own psyche about what is coming and what part they might be able to play. You know, they say, you know, I have a lot of the fourth ray, and they say that they're pretty good at being gloomy, you know, in terms of anticipating the future. But I think this just makes sense. I think the time has come now. And we wouldn't want to be deprived of the opportunity to win this particular battle on behalf of humanity. Well, yes, go ahead, please. I'm sorry. I'm fighting another little battle here, and we have to see who's going to win this one. Did you say? Cleaning out the house. Yeah, absolutely. The house is being... I had an old friend who said when you got pneumonia, it was making a pneumania. A new man of you. Pneumania. Anyway, there is a certain house cleaning that does occur. Okay, so what we're going to go to is, and I don't think we can really begin at this moment, but we're going to go to this section, which is about group relations. And in it, the laws of the soul are discussed. We're also going to be talking about the schools on different planets, which are very interesting because it tells us a lot about what the planets are the different planetary schools. You may have just been reading that, but there's so much that is revealed about the nature of those planets that it's very important. There's also an interesting thing about the 22, really 21, 22 methods of group interplay. In other words, he devised every ray into 3 subtypes. So you see how each ray works in 3 different ways in the service in the world. Now, not all of it is easy to understand, but at least it gives us an idea that rays are not monolithic energies, but have different divisions and different objectives. So as I have been somewhat talking about the second ray and the 3 different types of second ray souls, we may be able to derive various types of souls on the other rays as well. So I'd like to be able to talk about that. And then, of course, there is that looming section called the creative hierarchies. Now, that's just a huge thing. And I don't know whether we get to that this particular time. We do have one more meeting in this series of classes, and it might be best to leave one of the most difficult subjects until the last. I'm not sure. But we'll see how we do progress. Well, anyway, I think it's just about 12:30, which seems that we could break for lunch. I don't think we should start anything new. Do you have any more questions of any kind that will start us off on another round of saving the world, right? It's at the very end. It's in the law of the schools under the law of attraction, and it starts on page 1173. Very interesting section. You know, we're all in school, and we will learn about the nature of the school in which we have something to do. And I think we're in the school of magnetic response, actually, here on this planet. Yes, there's some amazing occult stuff here. This is worth looking at. And it's certainly almost, it's a day of work, I'm sure. The school of magnetic response. And all of us are graduates of painful endeavor and adjudicators between the pairs of opposites. What is it called? Purifying pain and healing sorrow, something of that nature. That's our curriculum, purifying pain. Let me take a quick look at what we have to go through this afternoon. Okay. Purifying pain and releasing sorrow. This is the planet of releasing sorrow and purifying pain. Welcome to planet Earth. But everything's happy. Don't worry about it. Okay. A further hint to be taken in connection with the 2 names given above is that its graduates are said to undergo examination upon the 3rd subplane of the astral plane. This 3rd subplane of the astral plane, I think it's just before the faculty of imagination is released. Let's take a quick look at that. That's page 188. And on the astral plane, imagination begins on the 2nd subplane, so it's right after clairvoyance, with which we are not to have much to do at this time, just before imagination and emotional idealism. So we undergo examination on the clairvoyant subplane, probably at night, where many of these tests are given. Have you ever had the sense of having a test at night, going through a certain process that you had to demonstrate some ability, usually which involves the conquering of fear of some kind? Tests of fire, earth, air, and water on the astral plane. Apparently those tests of fire, earth, air, and water are operative between the 1st and 2nd initiation on the astral plane. Okay, well, we have quite a bit to get into, and we'll see about the laws of the soul after lunch, and that takes us precisely to 12:30. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock.